Well, I want to commend you for making your way here tonight after a busy day of work.
Saya mau memuji saudara untuk usaha saudara datang ke sini melakukan perjalanan setelah seharian bekerja.
So we'll try to keep you awake.
Saya akan coba untuk terus membuat saudara terjaga, tidak tertidur.
With the time we have together tonight, I want to share some insights from the world of science.
Dengan waktu yang kita miliki malam ini, saya ingin membagikan hal-hal yang pertama terkait dengan ilmu pengetahuan.
And then to consider how that scientific learning compares with Scripture.
Dan kemudian kita akan melihat bagaimana hal-hal yang kita belajar dari ilmu pengetahuan ini kita bandingkan dengan apa yang dikatakan oleh kitab suci kita.
I want to start off tonight with a video clip.
Dan saya akan memulai malam ini dengan satu video klip
which lets us see what we're learning about very young infants.
Dan untuk memperlihatkan apa yang kita bisa belajar dari anak yang masih sangat muda atau kecil.
As neuroscience has developed,
sebagaimana yang telah dikembangkan oleh ilmu sistem syaraf,
the technology that comes with that science allows us to actually see the living, healthy brain in action.
Dan teknologi yang mengikuti perkembangan ilmu syaraf itu bisa memperlihatkan kepada kita tentang perkembangan otak seorang anak.
Because we were created by God,
karena kita diciptakan oleh Allah,
I believe that when we understand how the human body and mind work,
saya percaya bahwa ketika kita mengerti bagaimana tubuh dan pikiran kita bekerja,
we're discovering God's creation design.
Maka kita akan menemukan bagaimana Allah mendesain semuanya itu.
And we want to stay in step with how God designed children to learn and to develop.
Dan dengan demikian kita juga akan belajar bagaimana Allah mendesain perkembangan dan pertumbuhan anak.
Now we're going to take a look at a video.
Kita akan melihat sebuah video.
But I don't like John. But soon you're gonna give birth and we haven't found the name.
The process of learning language begins long before the baby human comes into the world. The fetus experiences all kinds of sensations in the mother's womb. An environment especially rich for the sense of hearing. By 24 weeks, the fetus's inner ear has developed, and it can already hear sounds, the sound of the mother's heartbeat, and even more than that, the sounds of the outside world. Loudest of all, even louder than the background noise of the uterus, is mother's voice. The baby human comes into the world ready to communicate. And in the beginning, the best way is crying. It elicits an immediate response. Crying is an involuntary signal of distress. The baby human can't really make any other sounds yet because they have small mouths, large tongues, and at this age, their larynx is high in the throat to prevent choking. But even though Heather's cries are involuntary, her mother responds.
Oh, my poor baby. Oh.
It's Heather's first way of knowing that the sounds she is making are a way of communicating.
Yes, much better, eh?
And that when she does, there is someone listening. When Heather hears her mother's voice, it immediately soothes her. Research shows that from the first days of life, babies prefer the human voice over every other sound. But what is surprising is just how attuned to language they are. Janet Worker lays 12-hour-old Marissa into a bassinet. She places a pacifier into the newborn's mouth. The pacifier is hooked up to a computer which records the frequency and intensity of the infant's sucking. Dr. Worker and her colleague, Tracy Burns, wanted to know whether only hours after birth, the baby human would prefer her parents' native language to a foreign language she had never heard before. Marissa was born to parents who speak only English. It was the language she heard in the womb. Marissa listens to a tape with two languages, English and Tagalog, a Philippine language. The actual words are filtered out, and the languages can only be distinguished by their cadence. Tagalog is played first. When she hears this language she's never heard before, she gives a very weak response. But when she hears English, her parents' language, she reacts completely differently. The intensity and frequency of her sucking shoots up, and then when the tape switches back to Tagalog, her sucking diminishes. This reveals two amazing facts: that baby humans begin to learn the properties of language in the womb, and at birth, they prefer the rhythms of their native language to those of an unfamiliar one. Nelson is less than 24 hours old. During his 9 months in the womb, he heard his parents communicating in English. As in the previous experiment, the pacifier is hooked up to a computer that registers the frequency and intensity of his response. Dr. Rushen Shi's experiment is designed to see if at this early age, the baby human can distinguish between different parts of speech. Nelson listens to a tape which contains two lists of words. The first is a list of prepositions and articles, words that have no meaning on their own, like to, in, or it. As Nelson listens, the computer registers his level of response. The second is a list of content words, like nouns and verbs.
Toys. Fine.
Parts of speech that convey meaning.
Toys. Chair. Fine. Chew. Chew.
When Nelson hears the content words, his level of reaction increases dramatically.
Fine. Fine.
This study has been repeated with babies in many different languages with the same remarkable results. That even at birth, the baby human is able to distinguish the words that convey meaning over all other words.
Toys. Chew. Fine. Chair.
Isn't that amazing?
Bukankah itu begitu mengagumkan?
To realize that while the baby is in the womb for the last 5 months,
Menyadari bahwa bayi itu telah ada di dalam kandungannya untuk 5 bulan terakhirnya,
the baby's ear is fully functioning,
telinga bayi itu telah berfungsi dengan penuh.
and their little brains are making meaning of the things they hear.
Dan otak yang kecil itu sudah membedakan arti dari apa yang mereka dengar.
They don't have words to explain what they're hearing,
Mereka tidak punya kata untuk diekspresikan tentang apa yang mereka dengar,
but they do realize what is important to them.
tapi mereka menyadari apa yang penting untuk mereka.
And I also believe that they can sense the emotion, particularly of their mother.
Dan saya percaya mereka juga bisa merasakan emosi dan khususnya emosi dari ibu mereka.
When the mother is stressed, the baby knows that.
Ketika ibunya stres, bayinya bisa merasakan.
And I think the baby can sense joy and happiness in words and expressions that they are hearing.
Dan saya percaya bayi juga bisa merasakan sukacita, kegembiraan dalam kata-kata yang mereka dengar atau ekspresi yang mereka rasakan.
Some young parents who have discovered about this development of the hearing in the infant in the womb.
Beberapa orang telah menyadari tentang kemampuan mendengar bayi itu di dalam kandungan.
Begin to read to their babies even before they're born.
Orang tua yang menyadari hal ini, mereka mulai membacakan sesuatu kepada bayi mereka bahkan sebelum dilahirkan.
And I think it would be a beautiful thing for mother and father and baby still in the womb to pray together each night.
Itu sebabnya saya rasa baik sekali kalau papa, mama dengan bayi yang masih dalam kandungan berdoa sama-sama setiap malam.
And even sing Jesus loves me.
Dan bahkan menyanyikan sama-sama Yesus mengasihiku.
We've been learning a lot about the human brain recently, and I want to share with you one more video clip here.
Kita telah mempelajari banyak hal tentang perkembangan otak, dan saya ingin memperlihatkan kepada saudara satu video lagi
that shares with us about the development of the brain.
Yang memberitahukan kepada kita tentang perkembangan otak.
Now, as you're listening, I want you to be looking for things that impress you.
Ketika saudara menontonnya, saya ingin saudara melihat hal-hal apa yang menarik saudara.
And possibly things that are new information for you.
Dan mungkin merupakan hal baru atau informasi baru bagi saudara.
For these newborns looking out from their hospital nursery, life has no boundaries. All things are possible. But it's up to their parents to make that happen. Whether they know it or not, these parents are looking at a chance of a lifetime, a window of opportunity to help their babies reach their potential. What they do in the next 3 years, good or bad, will have a profound impact on how their children turn out. This is the most critical period in human development. It's when we learn how to walk, how to talk, how to fit in with our environment. But unless children are given the right kinds of experiences at a very young age, they'll never be able to master the skills they need to get the best out of life. In order to understand why the first 3 years of a child's life is so important, it helps to know how the brain develops.
We now know, for instance, that young children do indeed have an incredible capacity for learning language and forming relationships, and that those abilities come really on the blueprint of human beings.
Recent discoveries in brain technology have given scientists the ability to see just how that blueprint develops. We now know that by the 17th week of pregnancy, a healthy fetus already has over 1 billion brain cells, more than a fully grown adult. But the cells are not in the right place. It's only after they form that they begin to travel to specific parts of the brain. What you see here is actual footage of migrating cells, something scientists have only recently been able to capture. Once these cells reach their destination, they form connections with other cells called synapses, which control various functions of the brain. By the time we're born, each cell has already made hundreds of thousands of connections, but there's still billions more to be made. From early infancy on into childhood is when brain cells form most of the connections we will keep through life.
And what will happen is, based upon a variety of factors, including environmental factors, experience, some of these will die off and some of them will be maintained. And over time, this incredible process of neuronal architecture is laid out so that you have a functioning brain.
As we mature, the brain physically changes due to outside influences. The most rapid change occurs during the first 3 years when a child is bombarded with hundreds of new experiences. It is at this point in development that the brain is most flexible and prepared to learn, building new connections where needed and casting off others that aren't used. This ability to rewire itself due to outside influences is what neurologists call brain plasticity.
one of the things that's really important to remember about development of the brain is that in contrast to every other organ, the brain is not developed at birth. At birth, your heart is fully organized and it is pumping blood and it's doing exactly what it's going to do for the rest of that person's life. And it is just a tiny little version of the big adult heart. That's not the way the brain is.
In order to get your brain to be what it's going to be as an adult, certain sets of experiences need to take place. What parents do for their children early on can have a marked effect on the wiring of a child's brain. How you touch a baby, how you talk to a baby.
Say hi.
What a baby sees and smells all cause connections to be made. But unless these experiences are continued in a loving, consistent, predictable manner, the connections will die.
The brain is exquisitely responsive to experience. And in the absence of experience, all of these synaptic connections are not maintained. So they're all pruned back and the brain literally stays small. If you take animals that are raised in the wild, where there's a whole rich network of experiences, their brains are 20 to 30% larger than the brains of animals that are raised in the zoo. If you take children who are raised in an environment that is environmentally deprived, fewer colors, fewer pictures, fewer sounds, fewer smells, fewer interactions with human beings, less touch, their brains will be smaller. In fact, we look at the CAT scans on some of these kids, or the MRIs on these kids, and the neuroradiologists, who know nothing about these kids really, they hold it up and they go, huh, this looks like an Alzheimer's brain. But they don't have Alzheimer's, they just didn't have the experiences that grow the brain.
As a baby masters new skills, new connections are made. A continuous process of wiring that reaches its peak at 3 years old. Then, as part of the process of normal, healthy development, the brain begins to rid itself of cells that aren't being used. Between the ages of 3 and 5, children will naturally lose about 40% of the brain cells they were born with.
So that if you really want to help organize a child's brain, you need to get to it early in life. If you provide the same kinds of experiences for the same period of time when somebody's 10, you won't have the same impact as you would if you did that when they were 2.
But it's not just a matter of presenting the right kinds of experiences at the right time. Your baby has to respond to what you do, which brings us to the first thing every child needs: interaction.
Okay, I want you to turn to someone close by, and what impressed you or what new information did you pick up there? Just share one or two things with each other. I know it's all in English, I wish it weren't, but what impressed you?
Bisa saudara mengajak 1-2 orang di sekitar pinggir saudara untuk berdiskusi apa yang menarik perhatian saudara dalam video yang baru kita lihat. Silakan didiskusikan dan mungkin ada hal-hal yang baru buat saudara bisa disampaikan kepada satu sama lain.
Well, let's do a little review of what we've been seeing here and hearing.
Mari kita mencoba melihat sedikit review dalam apa yang kita telah lihat dan dengar.
At birth, the baby's brain is an unorganized mass of cells.
Ketika dilahirkan, otak dari seorang anak itu merupakan massa sel yang belum terorganisasi atau terstruktur dengan baik.
I see this as a bundle of potential.
Merupakan sekumpulan sel yang merupakan sesuatu yang punya potensi.
But that potential needs to be structured and developed.
Tapi potensi itu perlu distrukturisasi dan kemudian dikembangkan.
Stimulating neurons connect with other cells to make meaning.
Dan sistem syaraf yang distimulasi atau dirangsang akan berhubungan satu sama lain dan kemudian untuk membuat satu makna.
And when these cells connect, they begin to build pathways in the brain.
Dan ketika sel-sel itu berhubungan satu sama lain, mereka mulai akan membuat jalan-jalan di dalam otak itu
And these pathways represent the way the child perceives things and responds.
Dan jalan-jalan itu memperlihatkan bagaimana anak-anak itu mengerti, mengenali sesuatu dan kemudian meresponsnya.
And these ways of perceiving and responding are with the child for a long time in many cases.
Dan proses untuk mengenali dan kemudian merespons ini ada di dalam anak itu untuk waktu yang panjang di dalam banyak kasus.
The child's experience is what stimulates the brain cells.
Apa yang menstimulasi sel-sel otak itu adalah pengalaman-pengalaman anak itu.
And establishes the pathways within the brain.
Dan itulah yang pengalaman-pengalaman itu yang kemudian membentuk satu jalan di dalam otak itu.
And these are the pathways for feeling, thinking, understanding, and responding.
Dan jalan-jalan itulah yang kemudian membuat mereka, membuat otak itu bisa merasa, berpikir, dan juga mengerti.
We also heard that this is the way in which the brain is sculpted or formed.
Kita seringkali mendengar beginilah otak itu dibangun, disusun, dan dibentuk.
The child's experiences profoundly influence the brain development.
Pengalaman-pengalaman dari seorang anak itu sangat dalam akan mempengaruhi perkembangan otaknya.
I think it's very important for us to consider what experiences are our children having.
Sangat perlu untuk kita pertimbangkan apa pengalaman-pengalaman yang anak-anak kita alami.
And what experiences are they not having?
Dan apa pengalaman-pengalaman yang mereka tidak alami.
Because the cells that are not being stimulated will die off.
Karena sel-sel yang tidak distimulasi akan mati.
And it will be much more difficult for the child later in life to learn the things that would have been easy to learn early in life.
Dan akan sangat sulit bagi seorang anak untuk belajar di umur yang lebih lanjut atau kemudian hal-hal yang seharusnya mereka pelajari pada usia yang lebih awal.
If they had only had the experiences that would have stimulated that learning and development.
Kalau saja pada usia yang lebih muda mereka punya pengalaman-pengalaman itu yang menstimulasi perkembangan otak mereka.
I believe that this discovery says a lot to what we allow our children to do for how much of the time.
Saya percaya bahwa penemuan-penemuan ini berbicara banyak tentang berapa banyak kita harus mengizinkan anak-anak kita untuk melakukan sesuatu pada waktu yang tertentu.
Many people who work with children are very concerned about the amount of time they spend on their devices.
Banyak orang yang berkaitan dengan pelayanan anak sangat concern tentang berapa banyak waktu yang dipakai anak, dihabiskan anak dengan alat-alat yang mereka pegang, device, misalnya handphone atau apapun.
Now there's value for the things that devices stimulate.
Ada memang hal-hal yang bisa disumbangkan oleh alat-alat itu untuk menstimulasi otak.
Our children do need to learn to use a computer in our day and age.
Anak-anak kita memang perlu misalnya untuk belajar memakai komputer.
But if the technology takes up all the child's time,
tapi jika teknologi itu kemudian mengambil seluruh waktu si anak,
and they're not playing with other children,
dan mereka tidak bermain dengan anak yang lain,
they're not using their imagination to come up with things to do,
mereka tidak memakai imajinasi mereka dengan hal-hal yang mereka harus lakukan,
and they don't have the opportunity to explore the natural world.
Dan kalau jika mereka tidak punya kesempatan untuk mengeksplor dunia natural alamiah di sekitar mereka,
they are missing major portions of their development.
Maka mereka sebenarnya kehilangan satu perkembangan yang besar dalam hidup mereka.
I think I'm going to share just a few highlights about some other aspects of the brain.
Saya akan mencoba memberi highlight pada beberapa aspek tentang bagian otak kita.
I think knowing some of these things helps us understand what to expect of children.
Mengetahui hal-hal ini akan membantu kita bisa berharap apa pada perkembangan anak.
Now, the brain does not all mature at the same rate.
Otak itu tidak sama-sama menjadi utuh, berfungsi penuh pada saat yang sama.
The back part of the brain matures first.
Bagian belakang dari otak itu akan bertumbuh atau matang lebih dulu.
That's the part of the brain that makes sure that all the basic functioning of the body is going on.
Bagian belakang otak itulah akan menjamin seluruh fungsi tubuh itu bisa bekerja dengan baik.
That part of the brain must be fully developed before the baby's born, or the baby cannot live.
Bagian belakang itulah yang harus berkembang dengan utuh sebelum bayi itu lahir.
The second part of the brain to develop is the middle part.
Bagian kedua otak itu yang berkembang itu di bagian tengah.
The emotional part of the brain.
Yaitu bagian emosional dari otak.
And the later part to develop is the frontal lobes.
Dan yang berkembang kemudian itu adalah bagian depan.
The part of the brain that helps us make judgments.
Bagian otak yang akan menolong kita bisa membuat penilaian-penilaian.
The part of the brain that helps us manage our own behavior and things like that.
Dan yang berpengaruh kepada tingkah laku dan hal-hal seperti itu.
I want us to look just at a couple more things related to the emotional brain, which is called the limbic system.
Kita akan mencoba melihat bagian emosi dari otak yang disebut sistem limbik atau struktur otak yang mempengaruhi emosi dan memori seseorang.
One part of the emotional brain is the amygdala. Now you'll see that on your sheet there.
Satu bagian dari bagian emosi otak ini yang disebut amigdala ada di bagian bawah.
This is where the emotional information is being made into meaning.
Inilah tempat di mana informasi-informasi emosi itu kemudian dirangkai menjadi sesuatu yang makna.
From birth, children are sensing the emotion of those around them.
Dari kecil, dari lahirnya anak bayi itu sudah belajar merasakan emosi dari orang-orang sekitar dia.
And young children will understand the affective or emotional part of a story very young.
Dan, could you say it again, please?
Okay. Well, let me say it another way. As children's pastors, I think it is important for us to realize
sebagai orang-orang melayani atau hamba Tuhan melayani anak-anak, penting sekali untuk kita menyadari
that children can have an affective or emotional grasp
bahwa anak-anak itu bisa mempunyai satu pengenalan yang bersifat afektif
of deep and meaningful truths from Scripture
tentang kebenaran-kebenaran yang dalam dan berarti
that they do not have words to express.
Yang dimana mereka tidak punya kata-kata untuk mengekspresikannya.
But as they enter a story,
tapi ketika mereka masuk ke dalam cerita,
and they sense the emotion of what is going on there,
dan mereka merasakan emosi dari apa yang sedang terjadi,
they're understanding deep things about God and how God works.
Dan mereka mengerti hal-hal yang lebih dalam tentang siapa Allah dan bagaimana Allah bekerja.
With young children, it's important for us to connect with their affective understandings.
Maka kita perlu sekali kepada anak-anak yang kecil untuk menghubungkan bagian afeksi emosinya.
When we're telling a story, let's say like Zacchaeus.
Misalnya ketika kita menceritakan cerita tentang Zacchaeus.
Instead of asking, now what was the name of the little man up in the tree?
Kalau kita bertanya siapa nama orang yang naik ke pohon itu, orang kecil itu,
asking the child for content information.
Kita bertanya kepada anak tentang informasi yang terkandung di cerita itu.
It would be better to ask the children, I wonder how Zacchaeus felt.
Lebih baik kita bertanya kepada anak, saya mencoba mengira-ngira bagaimana perasaan Sakeus
when Jesus looked up and called him by name.
ketika Yesus melihat ke atas pohon dan memanggil namanya.
How did he feel
Bagaimana, apa yang dia rasakan?
when Jesus said, I'm going to your house?
Ketika Yesus berkata, aku akan menumpang di rumahmu.
The child then gets the wonder of this relationship Jesus is beginning with Zacchaeus.
Maka anak itu akan menangkap satu keajaiban hubungan yang dimulai antara Yesus dengan Sakeus.
Now there's another little part of the emotional brain.
Dan ada satu bagian lain lagi dari bagian otak yang mengontrol emosi,
It's called the hippocampus. You don't have to memorize that.
yaitu yang disebut dengan hippocampus. Saudara tidak perlu menghafalnya.
It's important because that's where memories are being made and stored.
Itu penting karena disitulah tempat memori dibuat dan disimpan.
And what we find is that children remember those early memories for a long time.
Dan perlu kita tahu bahwa anak itu menyimpan memori awal itu untuk waktu yang panjang.
Even though they may not have it in their conscious mind later in life.
Bahkan mungkin ketika mereka tidak mempunyai memori itu dalam kesadaran mereka di waktu-waktu kemudian dalam hidup mereka.
Many times those early memories impact their wholeness and their wellness as they mature.
Banyak situasi kejadian di mana sebenarnya memori-memori awal itu berpengaruh atau mempengaruhi hidup mereka.
So we want to provide our children with pleasant and meaningful memories.
Maka kita harus menyediakan kepada anak-anak kita memori-memori yang menyenangkan dan berarti.
Whenever I find research from very different fields of study,
ketika saya menemukan berbagai hasil riset dari berbagai disiplin ilmu yang berbeda,
finding the same insights,
dan kemudian menemukan hal yang sama, pengetahuan yang sama,
I want to take a second look at those insights.
dan saya ingin kita melihat sekali lagi kepada hal-hal itu.
A few years ago, I was studying cultural differences.
Beberapa tahun yang lalu saya sedang belajar tentang perbedaan-perbedaan dalam budaya.
That was in preparation for teaching in Asia.
Dan itu dalam persiapan saya mengajar di Asia.
I needed some education myself.
Dan saya mencoba belajar untuk diri saya sendiri.
One of my colleagues recommended a book to me.
Salah satu kolega saya kemudian merekomendasikan sebuah buku pada saya.
And it was entitled Organizations and Cultures, Software of the Mind.
Dan buku itu berjudul budaya-budaya dan organisasi-organisasi, yaitu perangkat keras dari pikiran.
This was the report of extensive research.
Dan ini merupakan satu laporan hasil riset yang luar biasa.
It was research begun by the IBM company.
Yaitu sebuah riset yang sebenarnya dimulai oleh perusahaan IBM.
I assume they were trying to learn about cultures so that they could do business better in many different cultures.
Saya percaya bahwa perusahaan itu mencoba mempelajari berbagai kebudayaan supaya bisa melakukan bisnis lebih efektif di dalam kebudayaan-kebudayaan yang berbeda.
But in the 2010 version of the book that I read,
tapi di dalam versi tahun 2010 versi buku yang saya baca itu,
they had studied cultures in 96 different countries.
Mereka telah mempelajari budaya dalam 96 negara yang berbeda.
Now I'm not going to describe all those countries tonight.
Tentu tidak akan saya paparkan satu persatu negara itu.
But I want to share with you what I read early in the book.
Tapi saya ingin menyampaikan apa yang saya baca di bagian-bagian awal buku itu.
The authors define culture as patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting.
Penulis buku itu menemukan bahwa kebudayaan itu tidak lain adalah pola-pola dari berpikir, merasakan, dan bertindak.
These are the mental programs, the software of our mind.
Dan kebudayaan itu tidak lain adalah program-program mental dan perangkat lunak dari pikiran.
Now that metaphor really connected with me.
Dan metafora itu sangat membuat saya terhubung dengan sesuatu.
Nothing frustrates me much more than the software on my computer changing.
Tidak ada hal yang lebih membuat saya frustasi daripada perubahan yang cepat dari software komputer.
And it won't do what it used to do when I hit certain keys.
Dan artinya dia ketika saya menekan suatu tombol ternyata tidak seperti yang saya harapkan, fungsinya tidak jalan.
So that was a good image of how we respond to other cultures when the people in those cultures don't respond like we're accustomed to people responding. Dan itu gambaran yang bagus dalam pengalaman nyata kita ketika kita berelasi dengan orang-orang dari kebudayaan yang berbeda, ternyata mereka tidak merespons sebagaimana kita harapkan mereka merespons. Now, much of our culture is acquired during childhood.
Dan banyak hal-hal dalam budaya kita itu kita peroleh pada masa-masa awal anak-anak rupanya.
This next statement really gripped me.
Dan pernyataan yang berikut ini sangat menangkap perhatian saya.
Human physiology provides a receptive period.
Ilmu faal atau ilmu tentang fungsi sel itu menyediakan satu periode untuk belajar menerima pada usia 10 sampai 12 tahun.
A period of 10 to 12 years.
Periode usia 10 sampai 12.
When quickly and largely unconsciously.
Ketika dengan cepat dan boleh dibilang hampir tidak sadar,
the child absorbs everything necessary.
Seorang anak menyerap berbagai informasi yang perlu
to survive in his environment or hers.
Untuk bisa bertahan di dalam lingkungan di mana dia ada.
And learns that in the environment.
Dan belajar dalam lingkungan itu.
Children are learning the symbols of their culture and their environment.
Anak-anak belajar banyak simbol dan symbols and what?
Symbols of their culture.
Simbol-simbol dari kebudayaan di mana mereka ada.
They're learning who the heroes are in their culture.
Mereka belajar siapa para pahlawan yang ada di dalam kebudayaan mereka.
And they're learning the characteristics of those heroes.
Dan dia belajar ciri-ciri dari para pahlawan itu.
What seems to make somebody a hero?
Apa yang menjadikan seseorang itu pahlawan?
They're learning the rituals of the culture.
Mereka belajar tentang ritual dari budaya itu.
And they're learning the values.
Dan mereka juga belajar nilai dari kebudayaan itu.
Now, as this slide says, they are learning this early and easily.
Seperti yang dikatakan slide ini, anak-anak belajar itu semua pada masa yang sangat awal dengan mudah.
But it's very difficult for them to change what they have learned so easily.
Dan sulit sekali bagi mereka untuk merubah apa yang telah mereka terima belajar dengan mudah itu.
I remember one thing from my first anthropology course that I had.
Saya ingat satu hal dari kuliah antropologi kuliah awal antropologi yang pernah saya ikuti.
The last things that we question.
Hal terakhir yang akan kita pertanyakan
are the things we learned before we knew we were learning them.
Adalah hal yang kita tahu sebelum kita tahu bahwa kita tahu.
So as we work with children, we are influencing the development of their culture and of their brain.
Itu sebabnya kita mempengaruhi we are influencing what?
Their cultural understanding,
pengertian tentang kebudayaan mereka,
and the formation of their brain.
Dan perkembangan dari otak itu.
The environment that surrounds our children is extremely important.
Lingkungan yang mengitari anak-anak kita itu sangat penting.
So, in the environment that we create in a school or a Sunday school,
oleh sebab itu dalam lingkungan yang kita ciptakan baik itu di sekolah ataupun sekolah minggu,
and in our homes,
dan juga di rumah-rumah kita,
has a tremendous influence on the young child.
Punya pengaruh yang begitu besar pada anak-anak yang masih sangat muda.
For years it seems as if people have thought not much of importance was going on during childhood.
Dalam tahun-tahun yang telah lewat, banyak orang berpikir sebenarnya nggak ada banyak hal mempengaruhi anak-anak dalam masa yang sangat muda.
Regarding the church and ministry, we should keep the children happy.
Ya, kita harus mencoba membuat anak-anak itu selalu bergembira, terlepas dari apa program dari gereja.
So they'll want to come to Sunday school and other activities.
Sehingga dia mau datang kepada sekolah atau sekolah minggu.
Until they are teenagers, and then we can really begin to teach them about important things.
Sampai mereka kemudian masuk masa remaja, kemudian kita baru mengajar mereka hal-hal yang penting.
But the most important period of life in which we learn
Tapi masa yang paling penting dalam kehidupan di mana kita belajar
is that first 10 to 12 years of life.
Yaitu pada masa rentang usia 10 sampai 12 tahun dalam kehidupan.
And we want to be sure that our children have opportunities.
Dan kita harus meyakinkan bahwa anak-anak kita punya kesempatan
to come to know God.
Untuk mengenal Allah.
And begin to understand how God relates to human beings.
Dan kemudian belajar mengerti bagaimana Allah berelasi dengan manusia.
To discover that their God is a God who loves them unconditionally.
Untuk mengerti dan menemukan bahwa Allah adalah Allah yang mengasihi mereka tanpa syarat.
Those are the things they need to be learning early in life.
Hal-hal seperti itu yang mereka perlu pelajari pada masa yang sangat awal dalam kehidupan mereka.
Quite a few people who have researched the spiritual life of children.
Tidak banyak orang yang belajar tentang kehidupan spiritualitas seorang anak.
Have come to believe that children have their first image of God very early.
Tidak banyak yang menemukan atau percaya bahwa anak-anak itu bisa mengenal Allah pada masa yang sangat awal kehidupan mereka.
One author that I've read said that the child develops that first image or understanding of God between 18 months of age and 3 years.
Satu buku yang saya baca mengatakan anak itu mulai belajar mengenal Allah itu pada rentang usia 18 bulan sampai usia 3 tahun.
When the children are figuring out who this God is.
Ketika anak itu mulai mencoba mencari tahu siapa Allah itu.
This God they have heard named.
Allah yang mereka sudah dengar disebut namanya.
They don't have enough words to ask the questions that they might ask.
Mereka tidak punya kata-kata yang cukup untuk bertanya pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang mungkin mereka ingin tanyakan.
So as they're trying to understand this presence of God that they sense that we talked about this morning.
Maka untuk mencoba mengerti tentang Allah yang kita perasaan tentang Allah yang kita bicarakan pagi tadi,
many children decide that this great other must be like the greatest people they know.
Banyak anak yang kemudian berpikir sang ilahi itu yang begitu besar itu ya seperti orang-orang hebat yang mereka kenal.
Their parents.
Mungkin orang tua mereka.
Who are the wisest, strongest people they know.
Mungkin orang yang paling bijak, yang paling kuat yang mereka kenal.
And so many times the image the child has of God is taken from the characteristics of their parents.
Dan seringkali gambaran tentang Allah yang ditangkap oleh seorang anak itu adalah seperti ciri-ciri yang mereka tangkap tentang orang tua mereka.
When a child is raised by parents who love them dearly.
Kalau anak-anak itu dibesarkan oleh orang-orang tua yang mengasihi mereka sangat.
And who respond to their needs.
Yang merespons pada kebutuhan-kebutuhan anak-anak itu.
Those children tend to have an image of God that is a God of love.
Anak-anak itu akan cenderung mempunyai satu gambaran Allah yang adalah kasih.
But if the child's parents neglect them,
tapi jika orang tua dari anak itu mengabaikan mereka,
if they abuse them,
jika orang tua itu kemudian menganiaya mereka,
if the child can never satisfy the parent,
jika anak itu merasa tidak pernah bisa memuaskan orang tua,
then the child develops an understanding of a God who you're to fear.
Maka anak itu akan mengembangkan satu pengertian Allah yang ditakuti.
A God who doesn't listen to you.
Allah yang tidak mendengar kamu.
A God who you can never please.
Satu pribadi Allah yang kamu tidak pernah bisa cukup untuk menyenangkan dia.
Many Christian adults live with a negative image of God deep in their hearts.
Banyak orang Kristen dewasa yang hidup dengan satu gambaran negatif tentang Allah jauh di dalam hati mereka.
They can tell everybody else about the wonder of God's grace,
Mereka bisa memberitahukan siapa saja tentang keajaiban kasih karunia Allah,
but they have a very hard time believing that God's grace is for them.
tapi mereka sangat sulit percaya bahwa anugerah Allah itu sebenarnya juga buat mereka.
As we work with the parents of the children we serve,
Ketika kita bekerja dengan orang-orang tua yang kita layani,
we may run into some parents who are struggling in that way.
kita mungkin bisa berhadapan dengan orang-orang tua yang mempunyai masalah pergumulan seperti itu.
A good question to ask them, what was your first image of God?
Pertanyaan yang penting untuk ditanyakan, apa kesan atau gambaran tentang Allah yang pertama yang saudara dapat?
When we have learned something that is negative and undermines our life,
Ketika kita belajar sesuatu yang negatif dan kemudian mengecilkan, meremehkan hidup kita,
we need to learn what wrong idea we have incorporated,
kita perlu mengerti bahwa ada satu ide yang telah salah yang kita anut.
and then begin to release that negative understanding
Dan kita perlu mulai melepaskan pengertian-pengertian negatif itu.
and embrace a loving, present God as our God.
Dan kemudian kita menemukan dan mengikuti Allah yang baik yang kita kenal.
What children are learning in those first 10 to 12 years
Apa yang anak-anak pelajari pada rentang usia 10 sampai 12 tahun itu
is very important,
sangatlah penting.
and you are important
Dan saudara-saudara penting.
as you walk with the children through those years.
Ketika saudara berjalan dengan anak-anak itu melewati usia-usia itu.
Now I think we're going to take our break,
Saya kira kita sudah masuk waktunya break.
and then after you've had some food to sustain you,
Dan setelah saudara makan untuk menopang kekuatan saudara,
we'll come back and we'll go dig into the scripture to see how it compares with what we've been talking about in this hour.
maka kita akan kembali lagi dan kita kemudian akan melihat ke dalam Alkitab untuk membandingkan bagaimana hal-hal yang kita temukan dalam Alkitab selaras dengan apa yang kita bahas dari ilmu pengetahuan tadi.